Protein is now at Starbucks, and it's never tasted so good. Try our all-new caramel protein lattes with up to 31 grams of protein and options with no added sugar.
Level up, level up, level up, level up, level up.
Level up your drink at Starbucks.
Need to restock inventory, cover seasonal dips, or manage payroll? OnDeck's small business line of credit provides immediate access to funds, up to $200,000, exactly when your business needs it. With flexible draws, transparent pricing, and full control over repayment, you can tackle unexpected expenses without missing a beat. Apply today at OnDeck.com, and funds could be available as soon as tomorrow. Depending on certain loan attributes, your business loan may be issued by OnDeck or Celtic Bank. OnDeck does not lend in North Dakota. All loans and amounts subject to lender approval.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Heritage Voices, episode 103. I'm Jessica Quinto, and I'm your host. And today, we are chatting with Aaron Brien. Before we begin, I'd like to honor and acknowledge that the lands I'm recording on today are part of the Nooch, or Ute Peoples Treaty Lands, the Dinétah, and the ancestral Puebloan homeland. So obviously today we have Aaron Brien back on the show. You may remember Aaron from episode 23 on Salish-Kootenai College's Tribal Historic Preservation Program, episode 25 on technology, and episode 41 on collecting oral histories in Indian country. So our last episode together launched in July of 2020. So we have more than 5 years to catch up on, probably 6 almost, since we actually recorded that episode. So a lot to catch up with you on. And I know there's been big changes, but I'll let you say them. So Aaron, welcome back to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Aaron Brien. No, that was pretty good, actually. Aaron Brien, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Crow Tribe.
There you go. Now you have the big change. Everybody knows.
Like the biggest life change ever, you know?
Yeah. So, okay. How long ago exactly did that change happen? Was that like right after we recorded or a little while?
I was offered the job around this time, 2020. And so October, November.
Okay.
But I didn't start till December, and I didn't move completely over until about June or July, late June and July of 2021. But I was coming down here. It was during COVID, so there was a lot of room to like work remotely. So I was doing like a week on, week off, in person and remote, but the status of the office, it was pretty quick that I needed to be there like pretty much full time. So it just turned into like 4-10s where I was working 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. And then I'd have Friday to Sunday off.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, so you were teaching still at Salish-Kootenai during like that first 6 months or so?
Oh no, I should have said that. Because of the Salish-Kootenai College works in the quarter system, the timing worked out to where I wouldn't have started that winter quarter. So that was going to be the original plan, was to teach for that quarter just to help the college find a replacement and all that. But I think after I seen there was about a week and a half of overlap, and it was really more like an assessment. I came down to see like the status of the office and the state of it. And I realized I couldn't do that. The amount of work it was going to take, and I couldn't have 2 jobs, you know?
Yeah. So that's what my face was. Yeah, I was like, you're a THPO and a professor? That's crazy.
Well, and our office wasn't in the greatest place, you know, like it was pretty much non-existent. Without saying any names or blaming anybody, it was abandoned, you know, like the preservation office was abandoned. So, and literally too, we didn't have the building, the office space literally like was abandoned. So there was a lot of physical cleanup, like a lot of sifting through files and papers. And because at that time, the Crow tribe was receiving all its notifications like hard copy. So it was stacks and stacks of mail. And I took a picture standing next to a stack about 7 feet tall of paper. And so it wasn't just like the normal workload of a preservation officer, which is a lot. And I would argue the most. I don't know any regulatory office that receives more communications than a preservation office. So it was that plus the cleanup and kind of a fallout. It was like a government fallout really is what happened here. And so, yeah, I knew, I was like, I can't teach, or I can't even help in the search for, and I had taken on some tasks that I feel like I dropped the ball on. Like I was on a graduate committee for a student at the time, and he was super understanding though, like about my position and the opportunity to do what I was doing. So I was like a non-player on his committee, which I felt bad for, you know, and I shouldn't have done that. But at the time I was a professor, and it was like academics, there's always room for academics. And so, yeah, I think once I expressed to everybody what the situation was, I got a lot of sympathy. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So how did that shift happen? Like, was this always something that you wanted to do, or did the opportunity just kind of come up unexpectedly, or how did that shift happen?
I mean, I wanted to work in some form of Indigenous CRM, I guess you could say, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's a firm or just, and at the time my interest was solely archaeology. Like I really liked just doing archaeology and research. And I was the research coordinator for the Indigenous Research Center at SKC. And so that was like, that's the dream job, is to like do those forms of research. Mm-hmm. But I've always enjoyed challenges, you know, and the current chairman, and at the time he was running, was one of my best friends growing up, you know, so he knew me. And it's funny because he called and kind of joked like, hey man, I'd like to put you to work. You should move home. And it was all joking. So then he asked what my education was in, and I told him, and then he was like, whoa, like you're literally the only Crow that's qualified on paper, you know? So, and that's kind of how the conversation started. It was pretty informal at first. And because most preservation offices are appointed positions, you know, so it's not typically like the apply for a job thing. I guess a meeting with the chairman and the big wigs, you sit there and plead your case if that's what you want. But that's kind of how it started. And then it just went from there. I did a lot of thinking and a lot of pros and cons stuff. And because it was a life change. I moved where I had been living for so long and changed everything. So, and I don't regret it. You know, it was the right choice. It's a lot of work though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So your first job in the position was just to clean up the office and get everything organized and up to date, which is, I'm sure, a massive undertaking.
Yeah. Kind of like an audit, right? Like you kind of look at the position at the time, you don't realize how much professional currency that the job requires, that federal agencies have to believe you're there, and you have to have relationships with these agencies in order for the thing to work, right? Because there's really no guiding principles or policies. I mean, there's opinions on law. That's how this entire field functions. So there's no THPO book, right? We have Tom King's attempt at it. And at the time, you know, I thought that was the Bible. I now know that it needs work like anything, right? And so it's good. It's like a good starter, a place to start, but I would call it more of a commentary. It's like a commentary, not like a functional guide on how we do the job. So when I got there, it's hard to gauge that, like what we have. So I was on the phone pretty regularly. Like I kept a call log of the first couple months, but that proved almost like impossible to do because you live on the phone, right? So I was reaching out to federal agencies, reminding them that we're here, the address is current, like all that, doing all that. We had to rebuild the website. I had to do everything. We had to create job descriptions for positions. We had to create positions. We had to create some sort of system. There was no permitting process, no official permitting process that was founded on our law. So we passed the Crow Cultural Resource Act in 2005. So what I did is I thought we could start over, like ground zero, go to the law base all of our permitting, base all of our like the process that we have to do preservation work on the reservation, have it be backed by our own law, which is supported by federal law. So I had to figure out a way to make that, to normalize that, right? And to make it palatable to people who don't understand any of it. So for one, I had to get my own government to buy into the system that we were trying to create. And at the time, my right-hand man who had been there for the previous preservation officer did his best. Like, I gave him a lot of credit. He did his best to keep it, but he just didn't have the training and the broader scope of the work to know how it functions off the res. And so there's a lot of that. So I relied heavily on him for institutional memory for the last 4 years. So I purposely went out and got who I thought was the most reliable person from the previous preservation officer. So that would have been 8 years of memory. So I went and hired him, and that changed everything. Once I brought him on, once we started looking through the files and the communications records, we were able to like decipher what had been worked on, what we should be expecting, because these projects take years to negotiate, right? So then we had to address like the public perception of our office. So, you know, we're not monitoring certain projects because we didn't negotiate ourselves into those. We weren't part of any class 3 inventories because that was not negotiated or consulted on before. So there was this idea that it was my fault. So I had to take a kind of a mental beat down from the public, but really those negotiations and consultations happened well before me. So we were kind of combating that. So we created a social media presence. We tried to make everything available online. So what I'm talking about didn't happen right away. After I seen the status of the office, I had met with the chairman and the vice chairman, and I was very clear that this is like 3 years. Like, this is going to take 3 years to just clean up.
Wow.
And then we can start to like a legitimate flow in our office. And I was wrong. It took 4 years. It took 4 years, but we have a permanent space now. We've had that since the late 2021. Once that happened, that created a home base, right? And when I mean we had to rebuild, like we didn't have phone numbers. We didn't have a working email. So we did the basics.
Wow.
But ironically, in the 5 years that I've been doing this job, almost 6 years, that was the funnest part. So the work at the time was like unreal, but it was the most exciting, rewarding. It's like mowing a lawn, right? You see your product, you see the end, you see the before and after. The hardest part is keeping the momentum, because you go from like this exciting rebuild,
right,
but now just the flow of the work. That's hard to keep. And I think people don't realize, like, because there's kind of a high that comes with like making headway and like, just not to sound cheesy, but like breaking down barriers and educating federal agencies. And so now we're like in a flow where I've worked with tribal liaisons and cultural resource managers for 5 years now. And it can feel like it's a lull in it. I think that's just, it's normal. It's normal now. So I did have a hard time with that kind of the down thing, because you're so used to that. It being like, you're just running hot the whole time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, as someone that like started a business and started a nonprofit, you know, the building stage is very exciting because you have like a vision and you can really create whatever you want. And yeah, it really like, it's really fun and creative. And then you get to the maintenance phase and it's a whole different beast at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to describe because it really felt like so I started doing this kind of work, archaeology, ethnography, some level of CRM in 2011, right? So I take the job in 2020. So really it felt like I was training for that. But I didn't know that, right? I didn't know that I was training for this. And our office still needs a lot of work. Like we still, there's a lot of room to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you know, a lot of preservation programs adopt NAGPRA, even though it's technically not a function of our office by law. I mean, that's where the NAGPRA programs are housed. So our NAGPRA can grow a lot, you know. Preservation offices are often used as like enforcers on research and even some forms of recreation. So I think where we could grow too is like defining preservation officers' roles on reservations better, because we're kind of used as a catch-all. And I'm sure you've heard this from other preservation officers. We're kind of used as like the hammer sometimes. And if you don't regulate that yourself, it can get out of hand. And that's what it did happen to me, because I didn't want to say no to requests, right? Especially if they're coming from my own people. But it also got to the point where I was being pulled away from that true work of preservation, which is basically these 4 major laws, right? And the enforcement of those, to kind of becoming like the go slap the hand of a farmer that built a water line, when really that environmental probably might have more power in that, and I can act in support of that. So taking the lead versus being in support of is very different when it comes to the workload and the responsibility. So I hope I'm not alone on that, but I do think I hear it from other preservation officers that they deal with the same thing, especially out here in the West, because a lot of us in the Rockies and in the Plains, our offices are fairly new, but then they're also like very recently established. The function was there, the title was there, but the use and the establishment of those offices isn't as polished as some other places where they were early on in the establishment when the amendments were made and the funding sources came. So
yeah,
in the late 90s during the keepers and all that, when the keepers kind of came out, and the history of our offices, you know.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I can't believe it, but we're already at the first break point. It always goes so fast. But when we come back, I have too many questions for you. We're not going to be able to get to them all. I can already tell. But we'll do our best, and we'll start right after we come back. Okay, so we are back, and I want to ask you first, you were talking a little bit about this cultural resource law that the Crow Nation has and how that ties into your work as a THPO. Can you tell us first, like, what that 2005 Crow cultural resource law was and like what it covers?
Well, it's a pretty broad law, but its job is to establish our office, right? But it's also kind of gives our regulatory authority. So it's supposed to kind of spell out how we can punish even, you know, like, so it's the establishment of the office, the establishment of the culture committee, and also our powers, like where they come from and where that authority lies. But also it does suggest the finding process. But the problem with these laws, so what you might not know, and I don't know if your listeners know, that if you're a preservation officer, like a bona fide preservation officer, your department is founded by a cultural resource law. That was part of the National Park Service funding. To get the funding was you had to establish a law. That law had to be passed through your tribal government. Once that happened, you then signed a memorandum of agreement with the National Park Service that gives that authority and that funding to the tribe. And it's telling all federal agencies that this is who you work with within the boundaries of the reservation. You don't work with the SHPO, right? So making it the way I see it is it takes away the authority of the SHPO on reservations, which, I mean, obviously they never had that before, but it's establishing the rightful authority. So that law establishes that. Now, what happened when they created these laws is I feel like they rushed them. So because there was funding opportunities involved, and a lot of tribes, especially around here, we don't live in luxury, right? So they jumped at the opportunity to get that preservation funding. But in doing that, those laws were pushed along pretty fast. So they're kind of like plagiarized versions of the National Historic Preservation Act with like a hint of NAGPRA phrasing and ARPA.
Well, okay.
But because they were rushed, there was things that weren't thought out, like political things that weren't thought out. Like the way a preservation officer's authority lies is we are actually in contradiction a lot of the times with our own leadership, which is the nature of the job. But the way the law is worded is we're appointed by either our executive branch of government or our councils, however the government structure is. So there's an assumed loyalty to our tribal governments, which our offices aren't economic development offices. We're not business opportunity offices. Our job is to act as advocates through the law to tribal cultural resources, which sometimes directly contradicts what tribes are trying to do. So I've been in positions where there's an assumption that I'm going to go along with the goals of the tribe, which you would think, I think that's a natural assumption, but my job isn't that. My job is not to necessarily protect tribal people, but to protect tribal cultural resources. It's for them, but my job is to speak on behalf of a resource that doesn't often get advocated for. So I think the law should be very clear about how that works and what those things mean when they're kind of like general. And I learned this actually when I taught at SKC, because in our Intro to Preservation class, we reviewed like 4 or 5 different tribal laws, ordinances and laws, and they're relatively the same. So I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls. The other thing is, and this is purely an opinion, right? Like this is just from what I've seen in my work, is these laws give culture committees too much authority over preservation officers, when really those are 2 completely different functions. Anyone who follows preservation work and follows the law doing it knows that unfortunately there's not a lot of culture involved. It's regulatory work. So your job is enforcing these laws. Our job is not to teach federal agencies our culture. And so it's to voice an opinion through consultation and then to look for mitigation if need be, right? So the way these laws work is they require you to have a preservation board. And a lot of tribes who had already had cultural committees just grandfathered those committees as the preservation board. But my opinion is that those boards should include things like lawyers and in most cases, maybe a professional archaeologist to give advice, because not all preservation officers are like mine, where I was a professional archaeologist first. And I do think archaeology is kind of weaponized in our field, like working with tribes. So there's kind of like some trickery happening with it. So I feel like those boards should match the work to advise the preservation officer appropriately. And then, yeah, of course, there's cultural elements to it, and there should be, but it's not, I don't think it's the job of preservation officers to dictate or determine cultural practices and cultural work to its people. Like I have no right as a preservation officer to determine practices on the reservation with Crow people. Like that's not my job. It's not my authority. So, and I think sometimes because of the presence of those committees, we're treated as such, So there's those create some pitfalls in it. Those laws don't spell out some of that. And I also think we have an opportunity to define cultural resources for ourselves. And I think we dropped the ball on it, and we just kind of borrowed terms that non-native people use and the law uses, when we had a chance to put in our laws how we define cultural resources and landscapes and even artifact, right? And even how to manage those. Like we had the opportunity to do it the way we see fit to do it. When I think what we did is we just took a summarized version of NHPA in an act of chasing dollar bills, you know, and we're not the only tribe that did. I think hundreds of tribes have done that, you know. So I'm working with our government to try to amend some of that stuff and fix some of it, you know. So
Wow.
that was a lot. That was supposed to be a short answer.
No, but that's really interesting. So I guess with all of that in mind, you've alluded to this a little bit already, but you know, you worked before as a professor in a tribal historic preservation department, and now you are doing the job of a THPO. So I'd be really interested to hear how, I mean, you already mentioned a little bit about ways that it prepared you for this job. So maybe ways that it prepared you for the job and ways that it, you know, is different than you thought it would be from when you were a professor.
Well, man, the biggest thing that teaching taught me was how to speak. So like the largest weapon we have as preservation officers is our voice, you know, and so teaching, I learned to like polish that and kind of, and then having to explain NHPA and ARPA and antiquities and NAGPRA and how to articulate that to people who don't know it was probably the biggest benefit of, because that's, man, especially early on, that was like huge, you know, like that was like a lot of my job. And I won't say any names, but I have other preservation officers call me and we have these discussions because there is no training manual. So when you inherit a program, a lot of times you inherit that philosophy of the program too, right? So, it's not always correct. And I'm not saying I have the correct way, but that's why I think the law is real important in our job, because that's the guiding principle. So even if your law is broken, that's still what you use as a guide, because my opinion, Aaron Brien's opinion, doesn't mean anything in the law. So I can't back my opinion. It's just with me, right? So even if our laws are poor, I would encourage all preservation officers to always use that as your guide and look for creative ways to insert your beliefs and your opinions so they're backed by something. Because what I would hate to see is for third-party permit holders and people applying for permits that require ARPA and NHPA and stuff to start challenging these things in court, that they even have to do that. So I wouldn't want tribes to be responsible for setting bad precedent, right? So use your laws to protect yourself. Yeah, you might be right culturally, and you might be right like in terms of how your oral histories are applied to landscapes and all that, but make sure they're backed by those federal laws, because unfortunately, that's not how non-native people think. You know, they don't think in those terms, especially when working the environmental and preservation world, especially with the political climate now. It's challenged all the time. So we want to make sure those things are protected by what we've put in place to do those things. So SKC, if anything, teaching at SKC taught me to like articulate those things pretty clearly. But I also seen huge gaps in what we were teaching too. So it's like a shadow, it's like an hourglass, you know. And because preservation's so new, it's I don't know. We're gonna have those problems. That's just the way it is, you know. So
yeah. Well, and I imagine also there's infinite things that SKC could be teaching. So how to make it all fit into a degree program, you know, like there's gonna be gaps, I imagine, kind of no matter what you do.
Yeah. And the creator of that program, ironically, before the program was established, I would consider one of my mentors in the field, right? Like a guy named Jeff Benjamin. He's actually the preservation officer for the Stockbridge Munsee now, but he's non-native. And him and I have had these long conversations about the pitfalls of being a non-native, trying to create a program that benefits Native people, because the wants and needs, it's only an observational that's the perspective he had to take on our people, right? So he doesn't know the like common pitfalls of it. So we've talked about that. So, and because Native people, one of our biggest problems is we're emotionally driven. So there's an affinity now that the college has with that program, which is, I think, creating the inability to tear the program apart and take out what's not needed and add what's needed. And it's because it's kind of nostalgic, right? It's the only one in the nation. And I don't blame them, because I kind of feel the same way, because I took the pilot class for it, and when I was a student, and Jeff Benjamin got me my first internship in with the BLM, which led to what I do. And so I have a loyalty to that program too, because I feel like even though I'm not a graduate of it, it's my roots, And Jeff is one of my good friends and, like I said, my mentor. But he'd be the first to tell you that tribal people need to revamp the program, and we're not doing that. So, and I think we could get preservation officers together. I'm saying we, but I'm not there, so, and they could start developing courses that fit what we do a little more, and get rid of courses that we don't need to worry about,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, speaking of SKC, that you had just started working on the last time that we talked, you and Shandin Pete started the Tribal Research Specialist podcast. So can you tell our listeners, people that might be interested in finding another podcast to listen to on this topic, a little bit about what you guys are doing over there?
Oh, yeah. So out of the Indigenous Research Center at SKC, COVID hit. We had to come up with creative ways to still create content and still kind of move the needle in Indigenous research. And this could be a whole different podcast, but I'll try to sum it up. So we came up with the podcast as a way to invite people on to question them about Indigenous research and interrogate, because I think that's the state we're in Indigenous research, is we have to interrogate ourselves about this, and what holds water will last, right? And so Shandin and I think very similar when it comes to this. So the podcast was a safe and healthy way to do that. When Shandin left to go work at British Columbia, University of BC, it was only a couple months later that I had left SKC to take the preservation job. We both agreed that we should just keep doing the podcast on our own. So the first couple of episodes are actually called Podcast IRC, right? The Indigenous Research Center podcast. This might sound controversial, but I got tired of hearing the term Indigenous. Like it's like trendy, and it just started bothering me. And so I said, I don't feel Indigenous, right? What I've always felt was like I'm a tribal person, because I believe in tribe. The term Indigenous really, for me, feels like individual. I don't know why. It's always felt that way to me. And I'm wrong. I could be wrong, and I'm wrong all the time. But tribal it was real clear that it was a group, right? And that's who I represent as a group. I'm a Crow Indian. I can't be a Crow by myself, right?
Yeah.
And so we changed the name to Tribal Research Specialist. And I got the term specialist from the Army, because my dad was in the Army. And I remember as a kid, I asked him what a specialist was. And it just means it's like when it's narrowed, when your knowledge is narrowed, your skill set is narrowed to something, it's at that point in your ranking. Now you're efficient in what it is you're doing. You're not an expert, but you're efficient. That's where I got the term from. So that's why I chose it, because when I was a kid, I wanted to be in the Army. I had all these Army patches, and if you look at the military rankings in the Army, a specialist patch looks different than like a sergeant or a master sergeant. They're all just those rockers and mosquito wings or whatever they call them. And so it sounds funny, but that's literally where it came from. I saw it as a rank, because that's even where I felt I'm not an expert. I've never felt like an expert in whether it's archaeology or CRM or even my own cultural knowledge, that I'm capable though, and I'm competent in it, and I can speak it. If it was a language, I can speak it, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert, right? And I think Shandin would agree with me. So we started doing that, and I think if people like your podcast, I think they would enjoy ours, but I'll be honest, our podcast isn't for everybody. Like we're, for lack of a better term, I'm a smartass, right? So, and I'm very critical of my own people and what we can do better, including myself. Like when I bring up a problem with Indian country, it's not because, oh, I'm pointing the finger. It's usually because I've done it too, you know? And so we talk often about the difference between practitioners' knowledge and non-practitioners' knowledge and cultural things, and that we're constantly investigating this idea of the difference and how indigenous research method or indigenous archaeology and where those interpretations come from, and oftentimes come from non-practitioners, right? So are practitioners on the fringe of things. And so if you like that kind of conversation, if you like laughing, it's fun. We laugh a lot. Some people would probably call it a comedy podcast over an academic one. And I don't want to be academic. That's not my, I don't want to sit there and pontificate about post-processualism and symbolic archaeology and landscape. You know, I don't want to do that. We wanted to talk about Indian people problems and be okay with questioning ourselves. And that's what it became. It became that, like, we have these questions too. Like, non-native research always looks, when it comes to studying native people, they assume that we know everything. Well, you're the native, you know, and that's not the case. And there's reasons for that, right? Like, there's reasons why there's huge knowledge gaps and where that knowledge goes and how it can come back and how it's restored and all that. And that's what we talk about. We're just nonsense. I make fun of ribbon skirts on one episode for a long time. So, and I think it's one of the most downloaded episodes is that one and the land acknowledgement one, because I have mixed feelings about land acknowledgements. So we talk a lot about that stuff, you know. Trendy stuff, we attack trendy stuff all the time. Not to be mean, but because when you really follow them, a lot of them aren't even created by native people, you know? So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to go listen to that ribbon skirt episode.
Yeah. I've been called out on it quite a bit. But I stand by what I said.
All right. Well, on that note, we are at our second break point. And when we come back, we will talk more about your role as a THPO and some of the work that you're doing. Okay, so like I said before the break, really interested in hearing more about some of the specific work that you do as a THPO. So could you kind of, I guess, first break down the different types of things that you're working on as a THPO?
Well, we got some pretty major projects where, like, what we're trying to do is really establish, like, okay, so it's one thing to have people fill out permits, but we're still in the process of, like, educating the people we work with on what our role is. So we get people that come to us last, you know? So, okay, here, I'll give you a problem. And so we've been working on this for quite a while. The USDA, through the NRCS program, gives out these, they call them equips, and they're to ranchers and farmers. And they're like these small funding sources to develop wells and create fences or build fences and stuff, right? What we're running into is that, and they're not the only one, the Army Corps does this, a lot of people, is they give the responsibility of consultation to the applicant. So what that means is now we have an 80-year-old farmer who lives up the creek, you know, has to come to my office and consult on behalf of his project, when that's the responsibility of the agency. Yeah. The farmer's not requiring the law that to be done. The agency is the decision maker. A farmer's not going to know how to, and I don't expect him to know. So we're also put in positions now to be like the good guy, right? So we get these people who most times aren't malicious. They're not trying to do anything wrong. They want to follow the law, but they're being asked to consult on their own behalf. And like I say, they're not the ones requiring the law, right? If they had the money and all that, they would just do their own project on their own land. But the feds are giving them the money. Therefore, the feds are the requesting agency. They should be consulting on behalf. So what we're doing is because most people, all people, don't know that you have to do that early. So now they're ready. They got their contract. Their contractor's coming out on Monday, and they're going to do the water well. And so he comes in. He's like, "Oh, I'm supposed to get this signature from you." And I'm like, "We don't even know what you're doing." And so then it ends up where we're forced to look bad. Like they put us in these positions where we're the bad guy. Yeah. You can't dig your water line right now. We have to review your project. And so now the public, that individual sees us as we're stopping him from doing his job. We're stopping the contractor. So now the contractor's like, "What? I drove all my equipment down there. We're ready to go." The landowner's saying, "Well, this is my land. Why do I need your permission?" Yeah. The federal agency isn't answering them, saying, really, we should have been the ones to consult with them, right?
Yeah. Oof, that's awful.
So now we look like we're just trying to assert authority where there's none. Yeah. So we do our best to work with them. A lot of pleases, a lot of thank yous. I've even waived a lot of fees. And the reason we do that is to just create. So we're neighbors to these people, right? So we have to act accordingly. And that's something the law never considers. Like we don't consider that. So it's like, oh man, like, so we want them to come back. So when the next time they come back, we want them to know they come back early. So I make that very clear to them. Hey, I'll send somebody out today, which is not typical. I'm going to stop him from this project. He's going to go with you. You guys can go over your project 90% of the time. It's fine. We're not going to, but we're trying to teach them the process, not the outcome. So most people say, well, there's nothing there. So we're trying to teach that, like, well, we know there's nothing there. We would even agree sometimes there's nothing there. That's not what we're worried about. We're worried about doing it right according to the law. And so we teach them that. And we're finding that they're coming back and they're coming back earlier. The problem is federal agencies still aren't doing that consultation. They're making the individual do it. And so I'm encouraging the public to require their agency to do that consultation. Yeah. And it's just because that's what we do. Preservation officers consult with federal agencies, you know? Right. And so that's a huge undertaking. But we still got guys out doing surveys. And because I meet the standards under the interior for archaeology, all of my people are trained arch technicians. I trust them in everything, so that we're getting into the class 3 game a little bit, you know? So we're starting to do class 3 inventories, and which I don't know, this is experimental because the workload almost seems to not allow for it. We're still kind of working out the kinks on that, but we've done them. We've done for the National Guard, for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, several others. The oil guy, Phillips 66, and our Conical Phillips, and we've done things like that. And what our biggest goal is to be present on everything, you know? So like whether it's a contractor doing it, we want somebody there. We just want people to know we're here. So that's always been like the biggest undertaking of our office. So that's an ongoing thing, you know, but if I can get the Bureau of Indian Affairs to consult right, the Army Corps to consult right, things would be a lot better. I have no problem criticizing the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They've heard it all from me, but I think it's telling. Our tribe just filed a lawsuit against the Bureau of Indian Affairs for similar issues. It just was in the paper on Tuesday or Monday. And it was actually in the paper. I didn't know people still did that. Like I forget about newspapers, you know, it was on the front page of the paper. Yeah. So we're doing some cool stuff though. We did some timber sales stuff where from start to finish, we did the class 3, wrote the report, consulted, did all the consultation. So, but it's all a learning process because I've also learned that it's complicated when you do that Because really a preservation officer's job is to review class 3 inventories where there's potential effect. When we're doing the class 3 inventory, that means I'm also the reviewer of the project. And I don't think I'm necessarily comfortable with that, you know? So with the direction we're going is we're encouraging federal agencies and for these companies that work on the res to contract to CRM firms that meet like Section 8A contracting. So like minorities, tribes, things like that. And then as part of that agreement, they're required to hire to hire 2 of my guys to work on those survey projects, and then we can invoice for those projects, right? So they just work alongside on behalf of our office. But so we're starting to do like more things like that. I got 2 guys on the Sentinel Air Force project right now. It's a huge undertaking. Well, actually, they just got back yesterday. And then, so we do a lot of power line projects, and there's kind of a movement in THPO where projects are hiring what they call tribal cultural specialists. So, but because I'm an unofficial risk manager, that's been a big topic amongst the Montana THPOs because we have the Montana THPO Alliance, and we meet, and a discussion is how to make that process work better. So we've been working on that for a couple of years, you know. Yeah, THPO works hard. It's a lot of personalities and a lot of law, and I mean, there's a lot. Like we do a lot. I mean, I think we're reviewing anywhere from 250 to 500 projects a month, our Section 106 stuff. And so we might, if we consult on 10 of those, that's a lot. That's a lot, even just 10 of those in a month. So we have consultation going all the time. I think one of the things that's changed with me over the 5 years is I've learned to know where my efforts are best going to go. And so I don't feel the need to consult on projects that there's 10 preservation officers, capable preservation officers working on. So we just kind of act as an informed party where they notify us, where those agencies will just keep us in the loop. And if something comes up, we'll voice. But a lot of times, because of our THPO Alliance, I can reach out to one of my colleagues and say, hey, has this been addressed or this been addressed? Because our goal is to protect the resources, you know, the interests of our tribes. And oftentimes those interests overlap. So learn to use other preservation officers and vice versa. I've been at meetings where they've asked me the same thing. So yeah, send flowers and cards to your preservation officers. They're suffering. And that's not even counting like the politics right now, because the politics aren't making it any easier. We're still required to do the same amount of work we're doing. And even during the shutdown, we're still required to answer these Section 106 letters in the 30 days, but there's nobody to call to consult with. So it's weird. And then the energy thing, the 7-day review process for energy development is interesting because we got federal agencies now claiming things that really aren't emergency energy. So one of the loopholes is you just ask them to define it as an emergency energy crisis, and then that usually buys you some time to do adequate review, you know, of a project. So,
wow. Okay, so for listeners, just some context, we're recording this towards the end of October of 2025. So currently we're right in the middle of government shutdown that of 2025, hopefully not government shutdown of 2026. I mean, at this rate, it seems like it's never going to end. But all of you listening, by the time this launches, you will know what we do not know as we are recording this episode. So yeah, an interesting moment in time. But so, I mean, obviously, this is the first year of the second Trump administration. We're in the middle of a shutdown right now. And I'd be curious from your perspective as a THPO, and I know I've seen at least one article with you that talks a little bit about this, but how do you feel like the change in administration has affected your work as a THPO?
Well, I think the biggest effect is his attack on funding, like on the way we do our work. We need money to do our job, right? So he's attacked.
Yeah, so
what is it, like $280 million he removed from the Historic Preservation Fund?
That is exactly what I was just going to say. Bring your friendly neighborhood THPO, not only flowers and chocolate or whatever you said, but also a call to your congressperson about the Historic Preservation Fund. And I mean, again, by the time this airs, the current situation may be different, but you know, for the next round, if not for this round, that's a constant call your congressperson from us.
Yeah, please. So all that money, that money hasn't been allocated yet. You know, I think if I remember, it was like $289 million, I think is what it was. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. But so that's been hard because what it does is, so the work, it's funny because the work itself hasn't changed. There's a misnomer or a misunderstanding that our job was, because quote unquote the woke left was in government, that somehow our job was easier. The reality is it wasn't. In fact, most people don't understand what we do, and most federal agencies don't understand the function of their own laws and policies and how we work and our inner workings with that. So it doesn't matter if they're ultra conservative or ultra left or wherever your politics might lie. My experience is that the majority of people don't understand how we function anyway. And in all reality, my job has created barriers with both sides, because just because you're polite to me and just because that you might burn some sage before the meeting doesn't mean you understand the function of our job. And in fact, you're romanticizing what our positions are can actually create more pitfalls for it. And vice versa. If you come to me and you're ultra rude, and that makes it hard on an emotional level to work with, but also I do better work when I know where I stand with somebody. So in some ways, the politics has made the day-to-day strategy easier because we know, okay, we have to do this. What I've run into before was we had liaisons and cultural resource managers we thought were our friends. And we thought we got into like friendship relationships with these people. And then we find out we're not going to get what we wanted out of it. And so that emotional stake is higher in that sense. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And it doesn't mean I don't appreciate it. It just means that when everyone knows where they stand and everybody knows the ask, the work is actually easier, you know. The funding, of course, is needed still. The interpretation of the law is needed still. But I've encouraged federal agencies I don't need you to be tribal to do your job. I just need you to follow the law. That's it. And I think there is this belief that they have to adopt my beliefs in order to do their job correctly. I don't need that. And so I've encouraged everybody. The best advice I can give you when working with tribes is be yourself. Just be you. You know, I don't need you to be me. And we've run into that problem. And so I guess what I'm getting at, the current political climate, if anything, people are showing their true colors, which isn't necessarily fun, but in terms of our work and how we do our work, we at least know where people stand. And my opinion is that I'd much rather have that. You know, I don't necessarily need emotional hugs in my work, and like I don't need people to pat me on the back all the time, but it is nice once in a while. But I think what I appreciate is people who are just honest with me, you know, and I'm going to do my best to be honest with people and be very straightforward, because I think good communication isn't always fun, but it's a benefit to everybody when communication is clear and the route to those things. So if anything, that's one simple, tiny positive that's come out of, some of that has come out of the way that the government is functioning. Granted, I think there's legitimate attacks on preservation law and environmental law that are dangerous, and that people need to not talk about taking action, that it needs to happen. Like, you need to not only call your congressman, but you need to demand, if you're a preservation officer or a land manager of any type, you need to demand that these laws stay intact, you know. And I feel like people are too willing to just kind of go with the flow of things and do what's best for their careers. me personally, I can only speak for me. I'm not going to say any names, but I've had to do that. I've been faced with things like that, and I stick with the law, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's hard. There's less favor in it. There's less money in it. There's less prestige in it. But just, you know, I think I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I went away from that. So if anything, the current political climate has attacked those things. It's attacked people's morality. It's attacked their ethics. It's attacked professionalism. It's even attacked, I mean, funding is a given, right? It's attacked that, but it's taking all of those things and poking and prodding on them, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, laws are supposed to protect the public and protect the people and protect our resources. So it's only going to be enforced and protect the law. The law protects people, and people should protect the law.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. What a note to end on right there. I like that. The law protects the people, and the people should protect the law. I think that
wasn't planned at all.
Yeah, that was beautiful. All right. Other than that quote for us to end on, any final thoughts that you're like, oh, I got to get this one out?
No, I think I probably talked too much, but yeah, that's all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming back on. I can't believe it's been 5-6 years. That's crazy. But I guess that's what happens when you're running a THPO program. It keeps you a little busy. Yep. So, all right. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Heritage Voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Music Store. Also, please share with your friends or write us a review. Sharing and reviewing helps more people find the show and gets the perspectives of Heritage Voices' amazing guests out there into the world. Don't we just need more of that in anthropology and land management? If you have any more questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org. If you'd like to volunteer to be on the show as a guest or even a co-host, reach out to me as well, jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org. You can also follow more of what I'm doing on Facebook at Living Heritage Anthropology and the nonprofit Living Heritage Research Council, or on Twitter at Living Heritage A. As always, huge thank you to Lyle Belenkwa and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.